Good morning. Today's daf is daf Chad of Masechet Chullin. We concluded yesterday with the wonderful story of the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair, and so now, having shared that story, we are now back to the halachot of slaughtering, and so we are at the very, very top of Chedem and Aleph. Let me share my screen, and we will get really started. Again, over the last few days, we've discussed the specific idea that sometimes a that God does not allow a mistake to happen even with the animals of tzaddikim, so certainly not with tzaddikim themselves. And we finally got the story of the animal yesterday. So Amar Rabbi Zera. Now we go back to the halachot associated with slaughtering, and we say the following. Amar Rabbi Zera, some halachas according to the about the knife. Amar Shmuel, he says it in the name of Shmuel. Libain sakin v'shachat ba. If you take a knife and you do libain to it, so you make it white hot, and Rashi tells us, we can keep a finger on Rashi now in the very beginning of today's daf. We'll do that, and then we'll continue without. But libain ba'or, with fire, b'lashon chachamim nikra libun. In the language of the rabbis, this is referred to as libun, meaning from lavan, white, meaning white hot. Ubashon haloazim, but in a more generic or vernacular language, that it would be korin ba'admuse, in its redness, meaning there's basically, although we're using a sort of a term of white hot, it's really referring to red hot. So, and now what did you do? V'shachad ba, you slaughtered with it. Shchitaso kshera. Its slaughtering is kosher. Rashi tells us back into Rashi, Shchitaso kshera. V'lo amar sreifahi. We don't say that even though the knife was red hot when you used it to slaughter the animal, that you actually burn the animal to death. Velo shchita, and that it's not velo amar sreifa hizu, that this is actually a burning, velo shchita, and not a slaughtering, and therefore not kosher, because you have to slaughter an animal for it to be kosher. And why is that? Chiduda kodem lilibuna. We consider the sharpness of the knife, the point of the knife, to have happened before the heat of the knife. So next Rashi, chiduda kodem ulibuna, makdim umaher lachtoch. It's going to be cutting faster. Kodem shetchaveh habehima min haor, before the animal gets burnt with the fire. One second though. What about the sides of the knife? Aren't they red hot and therefore going to burn anything that they touch? So, as Rashi says, the disakin kishenichnas latoch chatach kodem shetishchat rov hasimanim. Before you've slaughtered the majority of the esophagus and windpipe, you will have already touched with the side of the blade, presumably, the other parts of the animal and caused them to burn. Hiso refet et hasimanim. You're going to burn those themselves, those pipes themselves. V'nimtza'et shehi nisrafa kodem shchita. And because it'll happen before you even get to the finish line of the majority of those two pipes, you will have burned the animal. Shaharei veshet nikuvaso, because when it comes to the esophagus, a hole in it, b'mashahu litraf, it is considered a treifa and therefore not kosher. V'sreifa kenekevhu, and a burning something is considered like a hole. And so if you make a burn in that animal's veshet, you're going to actually have a real problem. So the Gemara answers, no. Beis hashchita mirvach ravach. No, when you slaughter an animal, as you cut it, the animal's body is held together in a taut fashion. So as it gets caught, it separates. And so there is space. Back into Rashi, mitrachev achatach mitzadei hasakin, that it's going to widen once it gets caught. Mikanu mikan, on either side of the blade. Ve'ein nogea hasiman ella chidudo shel sakin. And so as a result, the only thing that is going to be touching the two relevant pipes are the esophagus and the windpipe. And so as a result, that we're going to be good, and we don't have to worry about the burning. So Ibailahu, now they're going to ask another question. Libin shapot vihikabo. What if you took a spit and you hit somebody with the spit after you did libing to the spit so that it is white hot or red hot? Mishum shchin nidon or mishum michvan nidon. If after you hit the person, now we're not talking about the damages associated with it. What it doesn't make a difference how you do the damages; those are going to be damages. But now we're talking about what happens if if tsarat breaks out. The skin, the halachic skin disease, the spiritual skin disease. Not talking about true leprosy, but the tsaras that's described in the Torah. If that were to break out from that location. And the reason that this is relevant is that in the discussion of tzarat in the Torah, there are separate rules. Even though the rules are identical, it's repeated separately for tzarat that comes out of a regular wound and or some kind of boil, and a tzarat that comes out of a burn. And so as a result, we're going to be asking, what is what happens? Are we going to treat what comes out of this like a burn or like a boil? And the question now the Gemara responds with is, Umat lamai nafkamina. What difference does it make? Meaning, you just are differentiating between two types of tzarat, but the two types of tzarat are identical. So how does it make a difference which one we're talking about? So the Gemara is now going to provide three background pieces to explain the question and highlight what difference it does make whether when somebody hits somebody with a spit that has been heated up, whether it is considered the resulting wound and the tzarat that follows is considered like a shchin tzarat or a michva tzarat, a boiled tzarat or a burn tzarat. So, Lidakiditanya, first brisa, that really is going to be the key element of this distinction. Shchin u'michva mitamin b'shavua echad b'shnei simanim. That there are two symptoms that will cause somebody to become tameh with the tuma of tzarat, if it's a tzarat of a shchin, of a boil, or it's a more general situation of any kind of wound, or a tzarat that follows from a burn. So what are those two symptoms? And by the way, it's only after 1 week, meaning that if in fact nothing changes after week 1, we don't have, as we would have for other kinds of tzarat, a second week of being set aside and checking to see whether the tzarat grows, but rather the person does not have tzarat in that situation. So the only time it would be tzarat is after the first week. One of the following two things happen. Either b'sei'ar lavan u'v'fisyon, that you have white hair, or when you have spreading. So those are the two different things. V'lama chilku hakasu. So all right, so why does the Torah distinguish and talk about the rules of shchin tzarat and michva tzarat separately? Why not just have them all in one paragraph? So lomar she'ein mitztarfin zeim zeh. It's to tell you that there isn't a combination. Meaning, if you have we will see that a tzarat needs to be the size of a gris, which is essentially a half a bean. So if you do have that size with one of these, great. But if you have half a gris of tzarat that came from a wound from known as shchin, so then that half will not combine with half a gris that came from a michvah, from a burn. And so as a result, in that situation, that person would not have tzarat. So that's brisa number one. Utnan, and we have another Mishnah that the Soros Hashas changes Vitanya to Utanan, and we are, by the way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down in the Gemara on the top of Chetamad Aleph, second word on the line. Ezehu shchin ve'ezehu michvah. What is the difference between a shchin and a michvah? So, laka be'etz, if you hit somebody with wood, or somebody was hit with wood, and we're not going to accuse anybody of doing any of the hitting, be'evan, or was hit with a rock, begefet, or got injured with gefet. Gefet, Rashi tells us, top of the last of the narrow lines in Rashi on Chetamad Aleph. Shehitmin yado, he sort of stuck his hand in the leftover crushed olives, and it's ma'od, and it's very hot there. So he's getting burned me'elav on its own. It's hot there by itself. V'nichva, and now he got burned. So the key is that we're going to see that shchin tzarat can even follow a burn. It's just a burn that wasn't caused by a fire. So here, right, this was obviously, the gefet was a naturally hot substance because of the crushing of it. It is too hot to handle, and it burned somebody. Or Bechame Tavaria, or the hot springs of Tavaria. So you went into those hot water and you one burned oneself. Or any other kind of heat that didn't come from fire directly. So and the Gemara interrupts the discussion of the brisa to say, what does this include? La tuyay avar mi'ikaro. This includes if you get lead right out of its source, meaning out of the mine, where just again, the chopping, the cutting of it out of the mine in itself creates some heat, and it's already hot in the ground. And so that again is not heat that is directly derived from fire, and therefore it will be considered a shchin tzarat if tzarat follows from the wound of the fire. Zehu shchin, back into the Baraisa. The Baraisa says that is a case of shchin. Ve'ezehu mikvah, what would be a burn? Nichva begacheles, that's if you burn yourself with a coal that was heated up by fire. Beremetz, with ashes, that of course those are the remnants of fire. Besid roseyach, with a burning kind of lime. Begifsit roseach, or a boiling kind of gypsum, which is a type of sid, a type of lime. Or basically anything that comes from fire. And what does that general category come to include? Again, the Gemara interrupts the description of the Baraisa. Includes boiling water. So zohi mikvah, that's going to be considered a burn. And so that is the second aspect of what we're really trying to get at with this question. Again, the Gemara is trying to understand, what is the ramification? Why are you asking this question about a heated spit that hit somebody? And now we have the third brisa that serves as background for our question. V'tanya shchenu michvah. Im shchin kodem lemichvah, when you have both a shchin and a wound-based tzarat and a burn-based tzarat, if the shchin happens first before the burn, bitel michvah as a shchin. The burn supersedes the shchin, and any tzaras that follows is going to be treated as a burn tzaras. V'im michvah kodemes l'shchin, bitel shchin es hamichvah. On the other hand, if the burn happened first, and then there was a wound, and then that wound turned into tsaras, the wound nullifies the burn, and therefore we're going to treat the wound, the tsaras that follows is going to be a wound tsaras. So now we're ready to explain our question. And so now what we're asking is which of these is more similar? Where, let's say you had a half gris of one tsaras of the wound tsaras at the very beginning. And now we do the experiment that we were saying. So the person now gets hit with a spit that was heated up to white hot. So now the question is the following: the nafak bay chatzi gris acher, and another gris, half gris of tzarat comes up. So our question is going to be: is that what's the story? Do they combine into a single wound and thereby create tsaras that is considered tsaras, or do they not combine and therefore the person does not have tsaras and does not have to go outside of the camps? So chavata kadim, do we say that the blow of the spit came first? V'asi havla u'mivatel lechavata, and now the heat is following and replacing the blow. V'havale shchin u'michva, and then as a result, it's a case of shchin followed by michva, v'lo mitztarfim, because now we originally had a shchin tsaras, and now the tsaras, we're going to treat it as a michva tsaras. The new half gris is going to be a michva tsaras, and so michva tsaras and a shchin tsaras do not combine, and so the two half grisim don't combine. V'lo mitztarfim, they're not going to combine. Oh, Dilma, or maybe we'd say havla kadim, the heat came first, because again, you're hitting the person with a spit that is both can cause a wound and is white hot or red hot, and so therefore it's going to cause burning as well. So maybe we'd say that the hit came first. V'asi chavata u'mivatel. I'm sorry, the heat came first. And so maybe the heat came first. And now the wound came after the heat. And so now you end up with the original half gris from a wound, the second half gris also from a wound. If they combine, you have a full gris, and the person is going to be tameh with the tuma of tsaras and have to leave the camps and go through the tahara process. So we're going to try twice to answer this question. In the end, we are not going to be successful at all. We're not going to answer the question. It's going to be a situation where we leave the question unanswered. Tashma, come and try and answer. The Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Shmuel, what we began with today. So, Libin Sakin V'Shachepo, Shchitaso Kshera, Chiduda Kodem Libuna, Alma Chavata Kadim. We have an answer based on Rabbi Zera's statement in the name of Shmuel, which is why, of course, we brought this entire case to begin with, right? What did we say? We said that when somebody takes a slaughtering knife, makes it white hot, or white hot / red hot, and now uses it to engage in the slaughter, and what did we say? It's a good slaughter. So we see that the wound of the slaughtering is happening before the burning. Any burning happens later. And so as a result, it must be that similarly, when it comes to hitting somebody with the white hot, red hot spit, that again, the blow comes before the heat. And therefore, if the blow came first, then what you end up with is the heat, and the heat creates michva tsaras. What you had originally was shchin tsaras, and therefore it would not combine. So not necessarily, that's not necessarily a proof because chidud shani. Maybe the case of a sharp, pointy thing is different. And so again, and that's part of our answer that we saw that the knife actually is so sharp that it separates the two pieces and it doesn't burn right away. So, all right, I'll give you a different proof. Tashma, here, take a look at this brisa. Libein shapud bihikabo. If you have a shapud, this is exactly our case. You take a spit and you make it white hot, and then you heat somebody with it. Nidon mishum michvas eish. It is considered the tsaras that is considered that comes from it is considered to come from fire. Alma chatavat kadim. So again, we see that the wound comes first. This is a direct proof for our question. So doesn't that answer our question? And the answer is not necessarily. Hasam nami divarziye mivraz dahainu chidud. No, it could be that brisa is talking where you poke somebody with the spit. We're asking about a situation where you hit somebody with the spit. And again, if you poke somebody with the sharp aspect of the spit, then everyone agrees that the wound comes first. But if instead you hit somebody with the side of the spit, which is red hot / white hot, maybe in that situation, the fire and the burning comes before the hit comes. And so as a result, maybe we would say something different. And so as a result, our answer in the end, the Gemara does not answer the question. We are left with an uncertainty in that situation. The good news is that we don't have tsaras today. And so as a result, we don't need to worry about how we would handle that situation, at least not at the moment. Okay. So now the Gemara addresses other potential issues with a knife. So Amar of Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravuha, and we are at the 2 dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom of Chedam and Aleph. Amar of Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravuha, Sakin Shalavodas Kochavim. If you have a knife that was used for idolatry, so mutter lishchotba, you are allowed to do slaughter with it. V'asar lachtochba basar, but you are not allowed to cut a piece of meat with it. Now, why is that? You're not allowed to benefit from this knife. It was used for idolatry. So why is slaughtering the animal not benefiting from the knife, whereas cutting meat is benefiting? So mutter lishchot ba, you're allowed to slaughter with it. Mikalkelhu, that is a kind of doing of damage. Second wide line, middle of the line in Rashi, near the very bottom of the Rashi. Mikalkelhu, ve'enzu hana. This is not considered, it's destructive. It's not considered a benefit. Shebechaya haya dameh merubin, because a live animal is worth more. Mila'akar shchita, from then when it was after it was slaughtered. Shebechayeha, when it was alive, hiomedet legimel dvarim. It's able to do 3 different things, and you can choose which one you want. It could be legadel vladot, it can raise children. Lecharisha, it could be used for plowing. Uleachila, and it could be used for eating. But you know what? An animal, once it's slaughtered, purposes, it only has one purpose. It can only be used for food, and therefore it is worth less than if it was still alive. V'asar lachtoch ba-basar, and you know what? It's also going to be forbidden to cut meat with it. Why is that prohibited? Mitakinu, because that's fixing things. Now, Tosfos here wonders, I don't understand. We have this concept of mikalkel also in Shabbos, and we never say that slaughtering an animal on Shabbos is permitted because it's destructive and not the productive act of shechita. So take a look at Tosfos fourth Tosos on the daf, mutter lishchot ba mekalkahu. Afal gaf de besof perak elu dvarim bipsachim. Even though in that chapter of Psachim on daf ayin gimel and aleph, mechayev inyan Shabbos, we say that somebody is liable for violating Shabbos, gabi shochet b'Shabbos, b'chutz la'avodas kochavim. Even if you sacrificed an animal outside the Beis Hamikdash for, idolatry. So you're not going to be able to eat the animal. But mishum tikun koldo. But yet there is some fixing of the animal. Because eating that animal will no longer be a violation of Aver Minachai. And so as a result, you've reduced the prohibitions associated with that animal on some dimension. And so as a result, even in that situation, we are going to say that is not Mekalkel, it is a malacha, and you violate Shabbos. So how can we say here that slaughtering an animal where the result is food is going to be considered mekalkel? So shiny Shabbos is different. The meleches machsheves asra Torah, because it is not a dollar valuation of productivity that creates a violation on Shabbos. Rather, it is an intention to do some malacha that is the thing that is prohibited on Shabbos. The keven sheyesh tikun purta, because there is some small fix, chashiv meleches machshavas. It's considered some kind of work. Shilakach niskaven, because that's what the person intended. Even though its value perspective, it did more damage, yeser al tukuno is greater than its improvement in monetary value. But when it comes to the prohibition of benefiting from idolatry, lo chashiv hana, this is not going to be considered a benefit. Kevin shikal kalu, yeser al tikuno, because its damage is greater than its benefit. And so as a result, that is going to be the situation there. Okay. One of the, many situations where we have effectively an opportunity cost in connection with our analysis in the Gemara. So Amar Rava says, you know what? Pamim shashochet asur. There are times that it would be prohibited to do slaughter, and because you would be benefiting. B'misukenes, for example, when there is an animal that is in danger of dying. And so as a result, if it is in danger of dying, well, then it is only good for one potential thing, food, and it is only going to be made into food if you slaughter it before you kill it. Now, I will note here that we are not talking about a misukenes because of a treifa. Obviously, in that situation, it wouldn't be kosher. But if we're now maybe even in that situation, it could be it would leave the category of Aver Minachai, and you could feed it to a non-Jew. So there may be even in that situation. But the simplest understanding is we're talking about a very old animal, and an old animal, despite its age, even if it would die potentially tomorrow, can be slaughtered and is still kosher. Okay. Umechatech, and there will be times, Rava continues, mutter, that cutting the meat, will be permitted. Why? When you have a gorgeous big piece of meat, and Rashi gives examples of a nice full thigh or a shoulder or a breast, where it is a sufficiently large piece that you could give it as a kurbana, as a present to somebody. Now, if you cut it, you are reducing the value of that meat. And so as a result, that kind of cutting with a knife of idolatry would not be considered a violation. The tepa glei mishum shimnunit to isura. Oh, 1 second. How? Here, you use this knife to cut an animal as part of the slaughtering process for an idol. And obviously that animal's not kosher. And presumably that animal's meat, got absorbed into this knife. So how can you use this knife to cut meat and say that it could ever be permitted? So that's the question, right? Take a look at Rashi, last Rashi on the daf. The Tepuglei Abal Gaf to whom Kalkel. Even though you're right that that separating these big nice pieces is destructive from a monetary perspective, Asur lachtok, it should still be prohibited to cut them. Mishum shamnunit de isura de nevelos shenivlu besakin. What about the fat that was absorbed from nevela animals, from improperly slaughtered animals, because they were slaughtered for idolatry, that were slaughtered with this knife? Oh, no, no, no. We're talking about, as we turn to Chedam Bed, Bechadasha, we're talking about a new knife. That's the situation, and that's why we're not worried about Chadasha. You're telling me it's a new knife? Bein Rabbi Yishmael, Bein Rabbi Akiva. Doesn't make a difference whether you follow Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva. They argue, by the way, on whether an avodah zara needs to be worshipped or just set aside to be an avodah zara. But that conversation, that debate between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva is only about the idol itself. Misham she'avodos kochavim hein. But this knife is just an accessory. It is just something used to assist with idolatry. When it comes to them, it is not going to be prohibited until it is actually used. And so you can't tell me that it's a new knife, because it must have been used in order to be prohibited as an idolatrous used knife. So two possible answers. Maybe they cut up some wood in order to worship the idol, and so as a result, the cutting of the wood, which obviously is not a non-kosher item, even after you cut the wood, it's not going to have transferred any taste to the knife, and so as a result, that could be one situation. Bishana shalibna bor. It's an old knife, but you did libun to it, so you expunged any of the flavor that was in it, and so as a result, there is no flavor left. So as a result, that is the discussion of case number one, using a knife for idolatry for slaughter. Yes, it's permitted. Again, there's a debate in the Rishonim. Is this lechatchila? Is this only speaking b'diavad? That, I'll leave for you to think about, but that is an aspect of the conversation here. Itmar, hashoche pesachin shel ovdei kochavim. Now, rather than an idolatrous used knife, meaning a knife used to worship idolatry, now we're going to just say the knife belonged to an idolater, meaning it belonged to somebody who doesn't keep kosher. And so the knife presumably absorbed non-kosher taste. Rav Amar Kolef. Rav says you need to do kolef. You need to scrape off the meat that was cut with that knife. So that's how you can resolve the problem of having cut with a non-kosher knife. Rabba bar Barchana Amar Madiach. Rabba Barchana says, no, you don't have to do all that. All you have to do is wash off the area. And the reason is because the taste, and of course, Tosfos here points out we must be talking about a knife that was used today, because a knife that was used yesterday, since this is a b'di'avad case, a knife that was only used yesterday, more than 24 hours ago, would not convey a positive taste, and therefore would not create any prohibition whatsoever. But so we're using a knife that was used today. But the issue is, how does it transfer the taste to the new meat? Do we say that it is effectively a transfer, like on some level, some aspect of heat, so that you need to cut off the edge of it? Rashi says, "Kolef beit hashchita," right? So we're talking about the area of the slaughter, because it will have absorbed some of the heat of the knife, or mediach b'mayim, or do you just wash it off with water? So those are the two questions that we have, two positions that we have with respect to slaughtering with a slaughtering knife that is not kosher. So lema b'hakamifli, what exactly are they arguing about? Can we say that the argument is the following? Demar savar beis hashchita tzonin. According to the position that says you wash it off, that's because the location of the slaughtering is considered cold. It isn't considered hot enough to create absorption. Umar savar, no, beis hashchita roteach. And the other position is no. The place of the incision is hot and therefore is going to absorb some of the taste, and that's why you need to cut off the edge. And the answer is no. We could say that these two opinions can be consistent, both perspectives. It could be consistent with the perspective saying that it's definitely a place that's hot, or they could be consistent with a place that's definitely a place that's cold. Let's see. Lo, the kuliyama bezashchita rutechu. We could say that everybody agrees that it's a boiling hot location. Manda amar kolef shaper. Everybody, it works very well according to the person who says that you need to cut off an aspect of the area and you can't just leave it. Umanda amar madiach. But according to the one who says to wash it, why is washing sufficient? I would have thought you just said that it was boiling hot, so why doesn't it absorb any taste? Because those pipes, those simanim, the trachea and the esophagus are pouring out blood, lo ballet. They don't have the ability at that same moment to absorb anything. And so therefore, nothing needs to be cut away. Ika da'amri. Alternatively, we can answer the kuliyama beis hashchita tzonin. You can't prove in either direction. Maybe everybody agrees that it's cold. And so man da'amar madeach shaper. Obviously, it works very well according to the person who says all you have to do is wash things off because it's no boiling, so there's no absorption. So as a result, washing off should be sufficient. Manda Amar Kolev, but the point that says that why do you have to cut off some of the area? Agav duchaka desakina bala, because the pressure of the knife on the location of the incision causes the location of the incision to absorb some of the flavor. And effectively, we worry about both of these kinds of things in connection with the halachot of kashrut. This is an important rule in connection with kashrut. Okay, so now we have a third topic of a knife associated with using it for slaughter. Sakin treifa. If you used a knife to slaughter a treifa, what needs to happen before you can use it to slaughter a kosher animal? Pligi ba Rav Acha v'Ravina. Rav Acha and Ravina disagree. Chad Amar b'chamin. One says it needs to have boiling water on it. V'chad Amar b'tzonin. And other says no, it can just be washed with cold water. V'hilchasa, right? And Rashi explains b'tzonin. This is from the bottom of the narrow lines. It's about 20-something lines up. B'tzonin, first word on the line. Kasaver beit hashchita tzonin. That would be because the location of the slaughtering is considered cold. The lo bala hasakin, the lo nitchameim. The knife that was used to slaughter a treifa animal was never got hot enough to absorb any of the taste of that treifa animal. And so the hilchasa afilu b'tzonin, and the halacha is that cold water suffices. We do not consider the location of the slaughtering hot enough to create a conveyance of taste. And so as a result, there is no belia, and water is sufficient to wash off that whatever is on the knife. The iika belisa de parsa lemichpare. And if you have a rag from a piece of curtain that you can wipe in it, lo tzarech, you don't even need to wash it. Meaning, a good wiping of the knife would be sufficient. Okay, and take a look at Rashi. V'hilchasa afilu bitzonin, v'gabi sakin shel heterhu to pasak. This is a situation where the knife was originally kosher. The pasak hilchasa lehetera, to say that here it's going to be permitted. Delo itzer b'liazu, because there was no improper absorption. Okay, the kasha hu libloa, and as a result, it's going to be difficult for it to absorb an improper taste. Ella al yadei riticha, only through some sort of boiling hot substance. Aval gabi suckin to isura. If in fact, however, this knife was usher for a different reason, for example, shel ovde kochavim, it was a it was used for avodah zara. Bepluksa de deleel lo pasuk. We didn't actually come to a conclusion in that question. Mibnei sha'asakin asura v'abasar rach livloa, because the knife is already usher and meat can easily absorb taste. In that situation, maybe it's not enough to wash it off in cold. Maybe you need to use hot boiling water, or maybe even libun, in order to make it kosher and not have any absorption of taste. Okay. So back into the Gemara, and now the Gemara. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we have one last question on this. Ulamanda Amar Bechamin, and again, so we are there are two dots in the middle of dot Chedem Bet, and we are 1, 2, 3, 4 lines above it, second to last word on the line. Ulamanda Amar Bechamin, according to the one who says that you need to use boiling water. My taima, what's the reason? Mishum de Kabbalah Isura, because it absorbed the forbidden fat. Dehetera Nami. Well, 1 second. Dehetera Nami Bala Aver Minachai. But 1 second. According to that view, that says that the location of the shechita is boiling hot, and as a result, when you do the slaughter of a treifa, it's going to cause absorption of the taste of that treifa into the knife. Why don't we say that there's a problem when you do shechita of a kosher animal? Because when you do shechita of a kosher animal, our initial assumption is that as soon as you begin the shechita, the location of the shechita begets boiling hot. And so as a result, it's boiling hot there even before you finish the cutting of the majority of the trachea and the esophagus. And yet, so as a result, there would be absorption of taste of that animal. The animal has not yet been slaughtered in a kosher manner. And so as a result, the taste that's going into the knife is not a kosher taste, but the taste of Aver Minachai, which is prohibited. So shouldn't even a regular slaughtering result in a problem? No. Emas bala, when does the absorbing happen? L'chi chaima, when the area is hot. Emas kachaima, and when is the heat? L'chi gamra shchita. It only happens when the slaughtering is complete. Hahi shaita haterahava. And at that moment, any absorption that happens from a kosher animal being slaughtered is kosher, because the slaughtering has been completed. Okay. So the Gemara now begins a series of 5 statements by Rebbe Yehuda, the first 3 in the name of Rav, the next 2 in the name of Shmuel. We will do the first 2 of these statements today. We'll leave the last 3 statements for tomorrow, and so we will go with that. So Amar Rebbe Yehuda, Amar Rav, first of 5 statements. Hatabach tzarech lishlosha sakinin. A butcher needs to have 3 knives. Asha achat sheshochipa, 1 to slaughter with. Now, that knife really could be used for other things, but because it is so delicate and we have to make sure that there are no nicks in it, it should just be used for slaughtering and not for anything else. The achat shemechate basar, 1 in order to cut meat with it, kosher meat. The achat shemechate bachalavim, and 1 to cut out the forbidden fats. Well, the issue with that is that the forbidden fats are forbidden. Chalev is prohibited, is usher to eat. And so as a result, you have to have a separate knife for that. So in second, why not just use one knife? Lichtok babasar, first cut away all the kosher meat. V'hadar lichtok bachalavim, and then you cut away the forbidden meat with it, the forbidden fat with it, and everything will be fine. And you could use one knife, and between cutting animals, you'll just kosher the knife again. And if it's not hot, you're not going to have an issue anyway. So why would you need two knives? So no, we're concerned that maybe accidentally you'll first cut the chalev and then you'll cut the kosher meat. And why will that be a problem? So let's see. Find the Rashi. I didn't mark it. Uh, okay. All right. So va'achar kach, it's Rashi 5 lines down into the wider lines at the bottom of Rashi. Va'achar kach yachtok ba basar bebehema achat machbat shehu Torah b'malachto. He's going to be busy with his work and he's going to forget v'yishkach v'lo yikanak, and he's not going to clean it off. V'asi le'ichalufi shel chalavim, and now the fat is going of the chalavim, the shel basar is going to go into the meat. V'yachtok below kinuach shesavarhu shesakin shel basar. He's going to think that this was the one to use for meat, and then it will be a problem because the meat will absorb some of that taste, and so as a result, that's going to be a problem. So that's the situation. So hashtanami michlaflei. But 1 second, why don't we have to worry that he has two knives, but he'll get confused between them, and so as a result, that could be the problem. So hashta na so kevan itzrachin hutre. Once we say that he needs to have two knives, islay hekera, he's going to make a mark to distinguish between the two, just as we distinguish between our dairy and meat utensils. That's also, based on this same Gemara. That is a piece of that discussion as well. Okay, so now statement number 2, Amar of Yehuda Amar Rab, Hatabach tzarich the butcher needs shnei kelim shamayim, 2 vessels of water, echad shemediach bo basar, ve'echad shemediach bo chalavim, 1 to wash meat in and 1 to wash fats in. V'nitakein lechad. Well, now why not have just 1? V'niadiach bo basar, and let him wash the kosher meat in it first. V'hadar nediach bo chalav, and then he could wash out the fats that are not kosher. Maybe he's going to wash the kosher, the non-kosher fats, and then do the meat. So, and Rashi tells us, why is that going to be a problem? Shema yediach halavim. Tchila, maybe he'll do the fats that are not kosher first. V'yayu amayim mufutamot min hashamnunit, and it will be the fat, the water itself will have some of the fat from the fat of the animal, from the chalev of the animal, in it, mixed in it. Al yedei shifshuf yadayim, because of the rubbing of the hands against the meat, again to get off all of the chalev. And so now you'll end up with some of that chalev in the water. And even though this water is cold, but it will then touch the sides of the kosher meat. And even though it won't be absorbed into it because it's not hot, it will attach itself on the outside. So hashtanami michal fele. Well, 1 second. So why aren't we worried about them confusing the 2 utensils, the two containers for the water? So, Kevan Tarti, once we require them to have two, Islay Hekera, he's going to make a mark on them so he knows which one to use for the forbidden fats and which one to use for the kosher meat. Amra Maimer Mishmei de Rav Papa, Lo Lischov Inush, Kafle Ilave Bisra. Don't flip over a side of meat on top of a piece of meat. Meaning, if the side of meat that has the chalev on it, it's on one side, don't have that chalev side touch another piece of meat for the same reason that we're worried about the situation with the water and the meat, because the fat will rub off onto another piece of meat. To dive tarba uvala bisra, it's going to drip from the meat and go and be absorbed into the other piece of meat. Drip from the non-kosher fat and be absorbed into the. It's going to melt and be absorbed into the kosher piece of meat, and now the kosher piece will be not kosher. No, and second though, if you're worried about that, kita ritzinami, when it's upright, also you should be concerned, because after all, that piece of chalev is resting on the piece of meat to which it was originally attached, and so don't we need to worry about that meat also melting and being absorbed? No, we don't need to worry about that, because karma mafsik mitatai. There is a membrane between the meat and the fat, and that membrane prevents the fat from being absorbed into the meat. Well, if that's true, there's a membrane on top of the chalev as well. And so even if you flip over the chalev and have it touching another piece of meat, you should be okay. Mila'ai nami krama ika. The top of the chalev also has a membrane. So why are you telling me that you're not allowed to use it? As Rashi tells us, top Rashi on now, we're on Tedam at Aleph. Mila'ai nami ki sechif lahu al gabi basar. When you flip it over on top of a piece of meat, Ika krama, there's still the membrane on top of it, mafsik, that separates, she'ein chalev, she'ein lo karam dak l'milamal. There's no chalev that doesn't have a membrane on top of it as well, a thin membrane on top of it. So no, that membrane is not going to last. That because the butcher is going to be rubbing his hands against that membrane, it is going to fall apart, and as a result, it will not be there and will not protect another piece of meat. Okay, we are through the first two of Rav Yehuda's statements. For the remaining three, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf, and I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. I will have an announcement after we stop sharing.
But doesn't this depend on a lot of these things? Don't they depend on the well, a number of factors. One, whether the knife is or if it's put on a certain plate, whether it's hot, whether the food is hot, whether it's cold. And I think there's a distinction between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, whether it's sufficient to clean it, or you have to take kedei klipa of the meat that came in contact with something else, with something that is that with which it shouldn't be mixed. And also, there's sometimes you take a kedei ketila, the aspect of the knife that came in touch, the amount that. Right, so there are different opinions between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah on that.
Correct. Well, we've been talking about shechita. In the end, it seems like the Gemara concludes that the shechita location is not considered hot, and so as a result, the key aspects of our discussion have all effectively, therefore, been involving situations of non-hot transfer, and so. That is why, in the end, we said that washing is sufficient. But in a case of hot transfer, then you obviously would need to deal with it in a different manner. And it depends, as you highlighted, on exactly how the knife became problematic, and therefore what would be the solution that's associated with it. We are going to have much more about the kashrus of knives over the course of our learning of Chulin, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And so, I'll ask for us to be patient with respect to the additional situations of hot transfer because I'm not ready to be able to sort of go into all of those details based on this Gemara alone. This Gemara, in the end, seems to have been talking only about cold transfers.
But there also is a difference whether the knife is, I think, whether it's
Serrated?
no, well, no, whether it's ben
Okay.
yomo or ano ben yomo.
Yes, yes. Well, we that Tostos, as I mentioned over the course of our learning together, we're dealing here with a Ben Yomo situation because that's why because we were talking about it as an issue lichatchila, and so as a result, we were saying that that Tostos says on the top Tostos, I think it is on Chet Amabet, the very beginning of the Tostos. You can take a look at the first words of that Tosos. Tzarech lahamid biyodin ba shehi bas yoma. That we have to say that the Gemara here is talking about where you know that it's a ben yoma. De'i lav hachi, because if it weren't true that it was a ben yoma, amai kolef, why would you need to do the klipa? Larav hastam kalim shall ovdei kochavim Einam b'nei yoman. We would generally say that a stam, unspecified vessel where we don't know when it was last used, we can treat it as if it was not used in the most recent day. And so that is, the bottom line in connection with that. But obviously, if it was not Ben Yoma, then obviously we would be even more lenient than we've been in our discussion today. So we will have, like I said, more on that. Let me stop the recording and then we'll.
But there is a distinction between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah.
That could very well be. I have
Whether
not looked at that in
there is
connection with the
whether the
preparing of
Shulchan
today's
Aruch
daf.
may in some cases allow one to use it. Also a distinction whether it's lachatchila or b'diavad, according to each of those opinions, the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch.
Oh, could very well be.